So Dr. Saundra McGuire is the past director of the Center for Academic Success and a retired professor of chemistry at Louisiana State University. Prior to joining LSU in 1999, Dr. McGuire spent 11 years at Cornell University, where she received the coveted Clark Distinguished Teaching Award. So you know she knows what she's talking about. Her best-selling book, Teach Yourself How to Learn: Strategies You Can Use to Ace Any Course at Any Level, was published in 2018. Her husband, Dr. Stephen McGuire, is a retired professor of physics. They have two daughters, Dr. Carla McGuire Davis and Dr. Stephanie McGuire, and they are the doting grandparents of Joshua, Ruth, Daniel, and Joseph Davis. She and her husband were named Louisiana Legends by Louisiana Public Broadcasting in 2022. That's quite an honor. She's spoken at over 500 institutions in 48 states and 14 countries on 6 continents. She wants you to know that she's thrilled to be able to talk with PLNU students today. So Dr. McGuire, I turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Clemens. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I cannot believe this 135 people are on the line. And so this is fantastic. I'm really excited to be speaking with you. And you're in San Diego, right? I love San Diego. And I actually spent, you'll see this, but I spent 68, 69 at Berkeley, that school year at UC Berkeley. And my roommate and I actually drove down from Berkeley down Highway 1, down the coast to San Diego. Then we went into Tijuana, then we went back up. And I love conferences there. That, the roller coaster. You guys had the only wooden roller coaster. Is it still operational now? Okay, yeah, I got a chance to ride that. So I am really pleased to be here. So let me do this. Let me share my screen. Okay, so we're going to be talking about metacognition, which I say is the key to acing courses and life. And so the first question I have for everybody, so just put yes or no in the chat box. If I were to ask you, would you say you are very familiar with the word metacognition, yes or no? And it's interesting because with this number of people in the session, okay, the answers are going to be flying up. But so far, I only see no's. I've seen one yes, now a second yes. But yeah, almost nobody's heard of metacognition. And so what we're going to be talking about is how we can use that to really maximize our learning. So since most of us haven't heard of it, only the people who have not, let me just ask you, because you won't know what it is. The word metacognition, would you say that's a compound? Is it a simple word or a compound word? So just put that in the chat box for me, please. Is metacognition a simple word or is it a compound word? And yeah, absolutely, it's compound. And so if it's compound, that means that it's got a root word and a prefix. And so put in the chat box for me what the root word do you think in metacognition? What's the root of in that compound word? Exactly, cognition. Okay, and you know, what I'm going to say is, since there's so many people in the session, if you see, once we see the word that you were going to type in, you don't have to feel that you have to type it in, but you're absolutely right, cognition. Now, the next thing I'm going to ask is, what comes to mind when you hear the word cognition? So put that in the chat box for me, please. What comes to mind when you, okay, yeah, brain, absolutely. Intelligence, memory, knowledge, thinking, thought, yeah, thoughts, mind, absolutely, thinking. Okay, all of those are correct. But for purposes of this meeting, we're going to use thinking as the meaning of cognition. And when you put the prefix meta onto a word, that just means doing that thing about that thing. And I don't know if anybody has, if you don't have to put no if you haven't, but if you have heard of meta research studies, put yes in the chat box, because that's something that many people haven't heard about. But meta research studies are just research about other research. And doing, like the theories like Piaget, okay, if they're studying other research. And so a lot of times during COVID, of course, there were a lot of individual people doing research. And then there was somebody who would come and put all that research together. So they were doing research about research. And so metacognition, simply put, means your ability to think about your own thinking. And so the way I like to think of it is, it's as if you have a big brain outside your brain looking at what your brain is doing. And that big brain is asking your brain questions. And it's saying, does she understand this information, or did she just memorize it last night because the test is today? It's saying, if she has a paper to write, does she realize that she needs to start thinking about the topic very early? She needs to go to the writing center and talk with them about her ideas so that they can help her structure. She needs to talk with the professor about her ideas and get some feedback. She needs to get a draft finished early enough that she can turn it into the professor and get feedback on that and make any kind of correction. So when she turns in the final paper, it's going to be in the best possible shape. Or is she just planning to whip it out the night before the way she always did in high school? And so we're going to talk more in detail about exactly what metacognition is. But before that, I want to start by telling you a story. This is a true story, actually. It's a story. It happened at a dinner party in Germany in the 1930s. And there was this Swiss aerodynamic scientist who was attending this party, and he got bored at the party, and he started thinking about things that fly because he's an aerodynamic scientist. And so he started thinking about bumblebees. And he started thinking about, why should bumblebees be able to fly? Because they've got this huge body and their wings are relatively small. They don't have a long, sleek body with long wings like a wasp. They just have this huge body and these teeny tiny wings. And so why should they be able to fly? They shouldn't be able to get off the ground. And he did some calculations looking at the size of the wings, the ratio of the body and all that. And he kept getting exactly the same result. Bumblebees should not be able to fly. But the good news is that bumblebees do not know any aerodynamic science. And so they don't know that they're not supposed to be able to fly, and they just keep right on flying. And I like to tell this story to students because I'm going to suggest that as you climb the academic ladder, and I know we have quite a few students who are first year, second year, and we have some seniors, but as you climb this academic ladder, you are likely to encounter people whose miscalculations will tell them that you shouldn't be able to fly. But just like the bumblebee, you don't have to pay any attention to that because God has enabled you to do what you can do. And nobody else has to recognize that you're going to be successful doing this. But so just keep right on soaring. Now, but I do want you to expect obstacles because remember that stumbling blocks and stepping stones can look identical. And you get to determine what role they're going to play in your life. And we're going to hear about some students who thought that they had encountered a huge stumbling block, but it really turned out to be a stepping stone. And so I say that the way to turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones is through metacognition. Now, I experienced a lot of stumbling blocks during my transition from a college freshman to a chemistry professor. But let me stop and ask you to put in the chat box. Have you ever encountered someone who you told them what you were going to do, and they acted like, well, no, I don't think you're going to be successful at that? Give me a yes or no in the chat box if that's happened. Okay, so I'm seeing lots of yeses and I'm seeing some no's, and it's great if you haven't. But I want, somebody said so many, yeah. And so I want you to be aware that this may happen. And if it hasn't happened yet, it's likely to happen. It's great if it never happens, but I want you to expect it. But again, you don't have to pay any attention to those people. Now, the next thing I'm going to ask is, have you encountered any stumbling blocks where you were just kind of humming right along? You thought that you were on your game, and then all of a sudden, something popped up that seemed like it was going to derail you from your plans. Give me a yes or no in the chat. Okay. And I see nothing but yeses there. And if nothing else, it was the pandemic. Yes. And so I do want us to know that even though things come up and look like stumbling blocks, they don't have to be stumbling blocks. We have the ability to interpret them. And one of my favorite scriptures actually is Romans 8:28. And I love talking to students at a Christian college because I can talk about scripture. But Romans 8:28, all things work together for good for those who love the Lord and are the called according to his purpose. And now actually I see somebody has put a little line on our screen. And if it doesn't get any bigger, that's okay. This has only happened out of the 500 times I've done it, it's only happened once before. And one of my hosts figured out, or maybe it was the person who put it in, figured out how to erase it. Because it's going to show up, I think, on every slide after this. But if it doesn't get any bigger, I think we'll be okay. But yeah, and so when I encounter stumbling blocks, then I'm actually looking at what is the good in this? What is God trying to tell me? And how is this going to make me better? And if we do this, it makes a big difference. So this was my first year at Southern University. This was when I was at the University of California at Berkeley, 1968-69, when I went home for Christmas with my hair like this, having left home with my hair like that. My mother was not a happy camper. But she got used to it. And then this is me as a chemistry professor and learning strategist. And again, to turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones, I say metacognition is the key to that. And so if we look at what is going to happen in this presentation, I can actually promise you that if you take this presentation seriously and implement the techniques that we're going to be talking about, one, you're going to understand exactly why your past grades could have been lower than what you're capable of. And I say probably because unless you're I'm going to say making straight A's, acing everything, then I think that you are capable of improving, because everybody in this session is very smart. And I want you to have concrete, effective learning strategies that are going to and not only improve your scores on exams, but you'll be equipped to ace courses, professional exams, and excel in your career. And I see we have a lot of people who are going to the next level, and you've got to develop now lifelong learning skills and not just, kind of float through. Now, how do I know that these strategies work? Because I wrote the book on it. And I have examples to show that it works. And this is the book, Teach Yourself How to Learn. I wrote it with our younger daughter, Saundra McGuire. She has a PhD in neuroscience from Oxford, and she's an opera singer in Berlin, Germany now. And so we work on these books together. So I know they work. Strategies have won lots of awards. I got an award in the Oval Office of the White House. And this is an award that's given to people who mentor students as the Presidential Award for Excellence in Science, Math, and Engineering Mentoring, for mentoring students to successfully achieve their academic goals. And these were mostly, all of them were graduate students. This is an award given for mentoring at the graduate level. And you heard in the introduction that my husband and I were named Louisiana Legends this year. And it was based on the work that I do with learning strategies. And that is our red carpet photo. Aren't we a handsome couple, would you say? No, just kidding, just kidding. And so I digress. So let's move right along. And we'll get back to metacognition. And you've already helped us define oh, thank you, Emily. We have been married 51 years as of last August. Oh, thank you, Myra. Well, you're gonna get me distracted. Let me get, thank you. Okay, I'm not looking at the chat now. I'm just gonna, but thank you. And so you've already helped me establish that metacognition is your ability to think about your own thinking, to be consciously aware that you're a problem solver. And that's really important because there are so many things that come up where people think that they might not be able to solve the problem. And so they'll go and ask somebody. But many of those things we can actually solve ourselves. And I'll give you an example of one, and that is a problem that many people have. And I'm going to mention this problem. I'm going to ask you to put in the chat box, yes or no, if you have this problem. And the problem is procrastination. So put in the chat box, yes or no, if you would say you have a problem with procrastination. Okay, I see mostly yeses. I say, yep, yes, with exclamation point. Mine would be, okay, JC, yeah, all these exclamation points. I'd be all caps with exclamation points. Okay, so this is an example of how metacognition works. If you're a procrastinator, the metacognitive brain says, you're procrastinating. We need to stop that. This isn't good for us. And so then the brain says, well, what am I supposed to do? I'm a procrastinator. I put things off. What am I supposed to do? And then the metacognitive brain says, well, we need to solve that problem because it causes all kinds of trouble, gets us into trouble. And so your brain says, well, like what? And so then the metacognitive brain starts pointing out the problems with procrastination. So put in the chat box for me, please. What are some of the negative implications, the negative consequences of procrastination? Okay, stress, exactly. That's the number one for me. Lack of sleep, bad grades, anxiety. Yep, you've hit on all the top ones. Increased workload, exactly. And you can't understand, weight gain. Nobody's ever said that before, but you're absolutely right. Because when you're stressed, I know for me, if I'm stressed, I'm procrastinating, I put stuff off, then I want to stay up all night, and then I want to eat when I'm staying up all night. And it's just, unnecessary mistakes. Hypertension, nobody said that, but you're absolutely right. So the metacognitive brain points out all these things. So then the brain says, okay, I get it. Procrastination is bad for us. And so then it says, so we got to solve that. And then the brain says, well, I don't know how to solve procrastination. What am I supposed to do? And the metacognitive brain says, well, I understand that. You don't have the answer now, but there are a lot of things that you didn't know anything about that you found out something about when you really wanted to. And I'm going to ask you, if there was something that you didn't know the meaning of, let's say you heard a new slang term and you didn't know what it meant, but you wanted to know what it meant, what would you do to find out what that meant? Put that in the chat box for me, please. Exactly, Google it. And so the metacognitive brain says, well, you'll Google everything else, so Google that. And if you were to Google how to avoid procrastination, you're going to be taken to all kinds of sites, YouTube videos that have wonderful strategies. And the only reason I know this is I was procrastinating writing a paper. Do you procrastinate writing papers? I know that's the worst for me. And I had put this thing off, and I was down to the last day. I'd given a presentation at a conference, and we had to submit papers to go in the proceedings. And so my metacognitive brain told me, you teach this stuff, so use it. And so I Googled how to avoid procrastination. I was taken to all kinds of wonderful sites, but this one I really liked, and I use it to this day. And so many students have told me that they started to implement it and made a big difference. This particular site said, it's easy to tackle procrastination. You have to tackle the hardest thing about doing something that you really don't feel like doing. So put in the chat box for me, please. What is the hardest part about doing something that you really don't feel like doing? What's the hardest part? Exactly. Yes, starting it. And so what this thing says is, starting it. So use the tool that everybody carries around with them now. Everybody has a smartphone. And it said what you should do is pick up your smartphone and set the timer. And set the timer for however many minutes you want to work on this thing, and then commit to yourself that you will not stop until the timer goes off. And so I said, okay, I could do that. So I set the timer for 45 minutes, and all I wanted to do was get the outline and the introduction written in 45 minutes. But by the time 45 minutes had gone, I had done the outline, the introduction, and the whole first section. Because do you notice that you tend to, once you get started, you get more done than you think you're going to do, but the hardest part is getting started. So that's a way that the metacognitive brain can actually help us solve problems that we thought we couldn't solve. It's your ability to plan, monitor, and control your mental processing, so you know if you're understanding something or just memorizing it. It is your ability to accurately judge your level of learning, so you know if you are studying at too low a level. And so here's a yes or no question. When we have, Myra said, we have work, school, being a mom, all of those things. So what we're going to talk about is how to be more efficient in our learning, which hopefully will help out with that. But now, when I say accurately judge your level of learning, put in the chat box yes or no. Have you ever heard a professor say something like, this is the university now, you got to kick it up a notch. We operate at higher levels here. Okay, yes, we as professors love to say that. Okay, now let me ask, what do you think those professors actually mean by that? Just put in the chat box, what are they talking about? This is the higher levels at the university. What does that mean? What do you think they're saying? Okay, yep, you got to step up your game. You got to learn how to study. You got to do more work. They expect more of you. Exactly. They want, yeah, be an adult, take more responsibility for your own learning, apply everything. Yes, and you're all right. They do mean all of those things, but they also mean something else. And that something else is concerning Bloom's taxonomy. So put in the chat box yes or no if you would say you were familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, B-L-O-O-M-S. Yeah, nobody's going to hold your hand and guide you. Okay, yeah, no, and most students are not. So we're going to talk about Bloom's taxonomy because that's what they're talking about. And then metacognition is your ability to know what you know and what you don't know. So you don't show up at a test or a quiz thinking, okay, I know this stuff, I'm good. And then you look at the first two questions, it's like, uh-oh, I guess I'm not good. And so I'm going to introduce you to these strategies by way of a couple of students. And the first is Dana, who was a physics student. And I met her, she was about to drop out of physics as a major after she made the 54. And so I met her at a Change Your Major workshop. I wasn't teaching the workshop, but I just went to see what they do at a Change Your Major workshop. And Dana was about to get out of physics because she thought she couldn't do it. And but I had her talk with, I asked her if she had time to meet with me in the office for about an hour, and she said, sure. And so I showed her some strategies, and these were the grades that she made afterwards. And her problem was that she had been memorizing formulas thinking that that would work, and also using cramster.com, which is now Chegg. I'll say a little bit more about that later. But after we talked, she started solving her problems a totally different way. And so I want you to hear from Dana in her own voice what she did differently. And Charmin, I'm going to ask you to give me the thumbs up if you can hear her, or the thumbs down if you can't.
Hi, my name is Dana Lewis Derby, and I am a former student of Dr. McGuire's, and she asked for me to share a little bit of my story with you today. So I met Dr. McGee at a Find Your Major workshop at LSU when I was a freshman. I knew that I wanted to major in physics when I started college, but I quickly found myself failing my introduction to physics class. So I freaked out and thought, you know what, maybe I'm not cut out for this, and decided to attend that workshop. When I went there, I shared my story, and afterwards Dr. McGuire approached me and asked me if I would consider sticking with physics a little while longer and maybe trying to approach my assignments and my tests in a little bit of a different way. So instead of changing my major, I did. I stayed with physics. Her and I began working together, and she began teaching me some of her strategies revolving around metacognition. I quickly learned that my method of trying to memorize material in order to pass assignments and tests just was not going to cut it. I had to really learn the ability to problem solve, and I essentially had to relearn how to study. I was reading chapters differently, making notes, and essentially completing homework assignments like I had to teach the material to someone else, with the thought behind that being if you can teach it, then you really do know what you're talking about. After working with Dr. McGuire for a full semester, I ended up making an A in my physics course, and I went on to graduate with my bachelor's in physics from LSU with honors, all with Dr. McGuire's help. So I didn't quite know that going to one workshop was going to be so instrumental in setting me up for success throughout my entire college career. My life would be very, very different if I had not met Dr. McGuire that day and implemented the strategies that she taught me. She is absolutely phenomenal, and she really does have the golden ticket of information that's going to push you towards optimal success. So I hope that you enjoy the workshop today. Thanks for listening, and best of luck. Bye.
Okay, yeah, and I asked Dana to make this video for students, but there are two things that she said which are really kind of misleading. She said that after she worked with me for a whole semester, she did well. Now, we did work together for the semester because I became her mentor after that, but she started making A's after the one session, getting the information that we're talking about in this session. And so it doesn't take a whole semester. And the other thing she said, I'm phenomenal. No, it's not me who's phenomenal. It is the strategies that are phenomenal. And I always say, to God be the glory for giving me this information to be able to share, because before I got to LSU, I didn't even know this information. I didn't even think this stuff was possible. But so the strategies are phenomenal. And I can tell you what I noticed when I taught at Cornell University. I found that the number one reason that most of my students who could have been making A's and B's were making C's, D's, or lower was because of the way they were doing their homework. And so I want to take you through this because, and you notice that Dana said she started doing homework differently. And so I want you to think back to when you normally do homework. Oh, and I think this is going to be one of the, I think the poll questions are coming up, but I want you to, no, that's not true. I'm sorry, Gail, it's much later. So we're going to do this by putting answers in the chat box. And so, well, let me take this off because I want to ask, when you typically do your homework, if you have to do problems or answer questions, if you've ever done this, put yes in the chat box. Have you ever looked at the problem you have to solve or looked at the question you have to answer and then flip back in the chapter to find an example of the problem you have to solve or a discussion? Okay, I'm seeing lots of yeses. Mine would be all caps and exclamation points. Yeah, everybody's doing that. Okay, but now let me ask you, when we did that, was our brain working the problem? Were we working the problems or answering the homework question? No, you're absolutely right. So if we weren't, but something was, because we turned the homework in, we got great grades on it. So what was doing the homework if it wasn't our brain doing it? Put that in the chat box for me. What was it that was doing the homework? Because we turned the homework in, we got great. Exactly. It was the textbook. It was the resource. It was the example, the author of the textbook. Absolutely. And so if you're like me, I bet many of you remember when I looked at the way the problem was worked, I remember thinking, oh yeah, I understand that. Oh yeah, I got that. But when we got to the test or the quiz, if they changed anything at all around, then what happened? It's like, uh-oh, I don't got that. And so this homework strategy will help you prevent that. So before looking at the first problem or question, we got to study the information. Study as if it's going to be on a test or a quiz the very next day. And, you know, because you focus in more if you're preparing for a test. And if you've done that, when you look at the problem or the question, then your brain is going to be able to start working it. So if it's a problem, then just start it and finish it, go all the way until you get to an answer. And even if you're not sure exactly what to do next, just power your way through until you get to an answer. And when you've gotten to the answer, just check the answer, just the answer with the answer that's in the book. If you got the same answer, then you can look at what the author did. But if you didn't get the same answer, don't look yet. Try to figure out where your mistake was. Now, if it's a question, then write down everything that you know to answer the question, and then go and compare what you've written to the discussion in the book and see, did they have stuff that you didn't put in your answer? Did you have stuff that wasn't in the book? Is your extra stuff correct? But if it's a problem, when you get to the answer and you just compare, if it's not the same answer that's in the book, don't look at what the author did yet. Try to figure out where your mistake was. And I have to ask you, at this point in the process, do you think making a mistake is good or bad? Put that in the chat box for me. Is making a mistake good or bad at this point? Okay, I'm seeing good, absolutely. Now I see one awful, and that, okay, and we're going to talk about a different perspective, but almost everybody's saying good. And it's interesting because whenever I talk to faculty, and as you heard, I talked with your faculty, and faculty always say, students say bad, but students always say good. And, you know, the majority of students always say good. And you're absolutely right. It is good if you make a mistake at this point. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's bad if you don't make a mistake at this point. It's fantastic if you don't make a mistake at this point. But why is it good if you make a mistake at this point? So put that in the chat box for me, please. Why would it be good if you make a mistake? And the keywords are at this point. Exactly. You learn from your mistake. That's the number one answer I get. And yeah, I saw you can fix it. Somebody, that's what I hear also. And then the third one that I hear, I haven't seen it quite yet, but you've got the main ones. They say, you know, you learn from your mistakes And okay, not good if professors take off points for making mistakes. Well, but Nathan, what we're going to talk about is getting your homework to the point where you don't have mistakes on it when you turn it in. Because we're not even at the homework yet. We're talking about the examples. When you looking through your notes of the book, these are examples that I want you to work through, and then you make the mistakes there. Now, yeah, Ashley says you don't make it on an exam. And so what happens is when you make the mistake now, and I guess the other reason that I haven't seen yet, sometimes students say, well, now I know where my brain is having a tendency to go wrong. And so you learn from your mistakes, you know where your brain is having a tendency to go wrong. And the third reason that it's not the test. And let me ask a yes or no, have you ever had the experience where you get a test back and you did a little bit worse than you thought, and you think, now, Emily, you don't know what the question is, so you can't tell me yes yet. So it's like those game shows. Let me finish the question. Have you gotten a test or quiz back and you didn't do as well, and you think, oh, I would have done so much better, but I just made simple mistakes. I made so many simple. Okay, now Emily says, yes, that's the question I was answering. Yeah, and I used to think the same thing, but now my attitude is there are really no such things as just simple mistakes. Mistakes only look simple in retrospect. Once you know what the right thing is, your mistake looks so simple, but mistakes are things that have to be made. And if you don't make them during this process, where are you going to make them? Put that in the chat box for me, please. You don't make them going through this, and learn from those mistakes so that you don't make the same mistake twice. Where are you going to make the mistake? Exactly, on the test or the exam. So you have to go through that to get the mistakes out of the way before the exams. So let me let the PowerPoint catch up, work the problems, check to see if it's correct. If it's not correct, figure out where the mistake was made. And again, that's still just looking at the example. So when you get to the actual homework problems, what I want you to do is treat those as if it's a test or a quiz. So try to do 2 or 3 of them and try to speed it up a little bit, because so many times people run out of time on a test or a quiz, not because they don't know the information, but because they're going very slowly through it, because there are no time constraints when you have when you're doing homework. And so you have to make sure that you consciously practice speeding up, doing things faster, so that when you get to the test, your brain will say, okay, yeah, I've done this before. I know how to move faster. And so this is actually what Dana did. Okay, so Myra says, sometimes our brain is not all there, so it reflects on the exam. Yeah, so what we're talking about is actually training our brains to be there more. Now, how do we make this work best? Well, we got to start the problems early, the day they're assigned, because when do most people start doing their homework? Put that in the chat box for me. When do most people start doing their homework? The day before, exactly. Or yeah, the day it's due. Sometimes we'll say the morning. Yeah. And if you're doing it the day before or the day of, what is your main goal at that point? Put that in the chat box. What's your main goal if you just started just to get it done? Yes, I call that being in get her done mode. And if you're in get her done mode, then you're not going to be able to make yourself go through that process, because it takes time. So you got to start the problems early, and don't flip back to see example problems, work them yourself. Now, and don't give up too soon. A lot of times, I don't know, I would do this. If I didn't know the answer, like within 2 minutes, I would think, okay, I can't do this. And so I would, try to flip back or whatever, but try to make your brain work on it for at least 10 minutes or so, because you're training it to do things, to figure out how to do things that it didn't know how to do when it first saw it. And that's exactly what happens on exams. But don't spend too much time either, like more than 30 minutes or so. And now we're getting back to this. And okay, what do you say to people who work hard to knock assignments out and get them out of the way? Yeah, great question, Nathan. That's not good. And so what I'm talking about actually is using homework as a learning tool, because there are different ways that we could see assignments. We could think of assignments as things that we just turn in to get points or get credit for, so we knock them out. Or we can recognize that homework is a learning tool. That's where a lot of our learning is going to occur. And if we take that approach, then we can see that knocking the assignments out is not going to be very helpful. Throughout the entire semester, ideally, when should we start an assignment? The week before? Oh, I see you saying if there's one assignment that's due the whole, that's going to span the whole semester. No, I would say sooner than the week before. I would still say as soon as it's given, then start thinking about it, even if it's not due until the end of the semester. And then because you'll be getting information that's relevant to that assignment as you're going through. So I would always be seeing, what is the professor saying? How does that relate to this assignment? So I'm going to be working on the assignment pretty much throughout the whole semester also. Now, Chegg, I mentioned Chegg earlier, and I'm not asking about you, I'm asking for a friend. Do you have any friends who use Chegg? Give me a yes or no in the chat box. Okay. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of yeses, some no's, yeah. And so I want you to tell your friends that Chegg is not your friend. Because if you use Chegg to get these, solve it step-by-step things, then it doesn't give your brain a chance to figure out how it wants to work these problems. And you don't build any confidence that you can be successful doing it. And so I suggest that we tell our friends that Chegg is not the best thing to use. Okay, so now moving on to the next strategy, which has been very effective. This is a reading strategy. And this was a student who'd made a 47 and 52 on the first two tests. And I talked with him about 30 minutes before the third test, and he made an 82. And I was shocked that, because, I figured 20 points, just talking to him the night before the exam, I figured he'd move from like 52 to 75, something like that, but he made an 82. And he was so excited. He said, Dr. McGuire, I made an 82 on that test. And I said, wow, Travis, that's fantastic. If you make an 85 on your next test, I will take you to lunch. 3 weeks later, he says he made an 86. So I took him to lunch. I said, Travis, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm just doing that stuff you told me to do. And with Travis, it was a reading strategy. His problem was that he wasn't getting a lot out of his reading. And so I'm not going to take the time to set this up as totally as I do in the book. So you may not be able to get the questions I'm going to ask you about this. But the strategy that I taught Travis to do was, before you start to read, get an overview of what you're about to read. Because what we know from the cognitive science literature is that if the brain is trying to learn something new, if it starts with an overview, a big picture, and gets individual details to fill in that big picture, it's much more efficient than if it just starts out getting individual details, trying to create its own big picture. And so that survey would be things like looking at the boldface print. If you have a chapter, break it up into sections. Look at the boldface print, the italicized words, any charts or graphs, so your brain knows what it's going to be learning about. And so, an example, if I were reading a chemistry chapter on acids and bases, I would see strong acid, strong base, weak acid, weak base. And so my brain knows, okay, that's what we're going to be reading about. And then the next thing is come up with questions that you want the reading to answer for you. So I might say, I wonder what this thing is going to say is the difference between strong acids and weak acids. Does one of them burn you more than another? Yeah, I don't know. And then after you've done that, when you start to read, just read the first paragraph. And after you've read that, stop and put that information in your own words. And then read the second paragraph, stop, put that information in your own words, and try to fold in what was in the first paragraph, and read subsequent paragraphs the same way. Now, I'm going to ask you this question, but because I didn't give you the total setup, you might not get it. Well, this first one you will be able to get. Does it sound like if you got to do all that to get through the reading, it's going to take much longer to finish your reading than what you would want to take? Does this process sound like it would take a long time? Just give me a yes or no. Okay, yeah, and everybody says, yes, it does. But I can tell you that students love this. They will send me emails. They came back to the office when we were in person. I said, Dr. McGuire, that reading strategy is fantastic. I'm getting so much more out of my reading now. And I said, wow, that's great. Now tell me, are you finding that it's taking you longer to finish your reading using this process than what you were doing before? And to a person, they said, well, no, I actually finished the reading sooner using this than what I was doing before. So my question, and this is the one that you might not get, my question is, why should it take less time to finish the reading if they're doing all of this stuff than what they were doing before? So put that in the chat box. Why do you think? Exactly. Yes, they're more engaged, they tell me. And there's another reason, because you're actually understanding, you retain it. Exactly. You're reading for understanding, you're comprehending. There it is, Charles Hanley. Yeah, less rereading. And I didn't set it totally up, but normally I ask people, what do you do when your mind starts to wander? And they'll say, I'll go back and reread. And so, yes, so when you're doing it this way, you finish sooner, because the old way, your mind would start to wander. You have to go back and reread. So you would read, then have to go back, read, go back, read, go back, read, go back. But this way, you really are moving more slowly through the material, but you get to the end point sooner because you're not doing all that back and forth. And you also speed up as this process goes along. Because can you imagine when you get to the 8th paragraph, if you've understood everything in the first 7, you're going to be able to read the 8th paragraph a lot faster. And so I've taught this to graduate school students, med school students, divinity school students, and they say it really makes a big difference. And so I'll let this catch up. Reading while you're reciting, and you can make notes in the margin, you can annotate. And then when you get to the end of a section, then stop and try to review what was in that section. And then the last one is reflect. Are there any other views? Are there any remaining questions that were not answered? And Imani says, you can't absorb so much info at once. Yeah, and so when you break it up and you do it that way, absolutely, Imani, then you can sort of understand it as you're going along. And then the last R is for reflect. And I'll give you an example of that because I know at least one of our students in the session is in dietetics. And so let's say if you were in a dietetics class and you had clients and you were working with people who, because diet is so important for health. And so you might have been told, or the textbook says, tell all of your clients to eat a diet that is very rich in fresh fruits and vegetables. Well, what if your clients live in a food desert? And so they don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. What can you tell them that's going to be useful for them? Because you can't tell them what's in the textbook. So you're reflecting on these other views. And if you do this, I can guarantee you that you'll get a lot more out of your reading. And so I want to give you, we're going to do a little exercise that shows you how this works. And so I'm going to put a reading passage on the screen. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to read it. Then I'm going to take it off and ask you a question. So let's read this. Okay, you may not have read the whole thing, but I think we've seen enough, so I'm going to take it off. And so my question is, give me a yes or no. If I asked you to, if you think you'd be able to do this, if I asked you to unmute your mic and summarize the information in that passage to the group, put a yes or no in the chat box if you think you would be able to do that. Okay, I'm seeing no's, and I certainly would not have been able to. Okay, but let me ask you this. If you had known before you started to read that this was about flying a kite, now I want you to read it again and put in the chat box yes or no if it makes more sense to you now that you know what it's about. Okay, I'm seeing totally yes. Okay, and I did see a no, and that's a good point because you would have to be familiar with flying a kite. And if you've never flown a kite, then you wouldn't be familiar with it. But if you have, then that's why so many people are putting yes. And that's actually a good point also, that many times what you're looking at in class, if you don't have the background for that, then it's going to be very hard to understand. So sometimes you have to do a little bit of reading to get up to speed on the background for that. And so, yeah, because now we can put these things in context. If it's about flying a kite, we know about, newspaper and magazine for making the kite, and birds seldom get too close, but yeah, so all these things we have a context within which to look at this. Okay, and this is the reference for that, and this is the web link for it if you wanted to look at it. And so this is just an indication that if you take a little bit of time to preview what you're going to be reading about before you dive in to read, your brain will have that context and it's going to be able to make more connections. And so now what I want to do is I want you, okay, what about the captions or the examples in the book? Oh yeah, absolutely. Looking at all of those things will give you that perspective, that they'll give you something to connect things to. So absolutely, that's great to use. Okay, and so now I want to ask a question that's going to help us zero in, I think, a little bit even more about the difference between maybe what we've been doing up to this point and what we could do to be more efficient. So my question is, what's the difference between studying and learning? And so again, there are no right or wrong answers to any of the questions I ask. I just want to know what you're thinking and what your experience has been. And so what would you say is the difference, making it yours and relevant to you? Okay. Studying is memorizing, learning is understanding. Okay, Megan, yeah, that's the number one answer I get. There are three common answers I get. I see Emily said the same thing. Studying, you already know most of the information. And so Madison, I'm going to come back to that. But there, okay, studying is reading and going to class, and learning is what knowledge you get from it. Looking back at info you've already retained. Okay, yeah, so I got a lot of answers. Learning is to understand. Okay, yeah. So the three most common answers I get typically, they'll say, like you said at the beginning, studying is just memorizing information for a test or a quiz, but learning is when you understand that information, you can make it your own, you can apply it to things that you already, that you had not seen before, you can use it to solve problems, answer questions that you hadn't seen before. That's if you're learning. Sometimes students will say studying is short-term, learning is long-term. And one young lady said, well, studying is what I do the night before the test to make an A, but learning is what I do if I want to retain that information. And actually, Claire, most faculty, I very rarely have students saying studying is the process leading to learning, but often faculty will say that. And so let me just ask everybody in the session, put in the chat box, yes or no. Have you ever studied something, but the goal was not to learn? You didn't even have learning as a goal. You were studying it, but okay. And what was the goal in that case? Because I'm guilty too. What was the goal when we were studying, but we weren't trying? Exactly. Yes. Just to pass. Yeah. And so if you're studying the right way, then it should be the process, but often it isn't. Okay. But going back to the idea that studying is when you go over what you already learned. And I hear that quite a bit, but I want to emphasize that, because I used to think the same thing, but now I have a different view of it. And I think that there's a difference between learning something and learning about something. Because when students would tell me that, well, studying is when I go over what I already learned, and I would ask them, well, when did you learn it? And they said, in class. And I said, well, yeah, I think that in class we're learning about something, but we haven't really learned it until we've spent the time on it to really make it our own. We're able to teach it, et cetera. And so if we take that, and maybe this is our first poll question. I should have, is that a poll question? Let's see. Oh yeah, it is. Okay, so yes, so I want to know, up to this point in time, if we take what we've said about study mode and learn mode, would you say you've been more up to this point in study mode or more in learn mode? And so far you are like your student counterparts all over the country, all over the world. Most of us have been, have been in study mode. And so usually the way I like to do these polls is when we get up to about 70% of the people who have answered, then I give you the 5-second warning, and then I'll take it off in 5 seconds. And we're up to 68%. I need a couple of people more to vote. And then, yep, there we're at 70. Okay, so 5 more seconds for 3, 2, 1. Okay, and we're almost to 80%. So I will end the poll and I will show you the results. And so most of us are in study mode. That is not surprising. I was so in study mode in school that, wasn't even funny. Okay, and so, and I see the problem, Gail. I totally apologize. I had not put it up there to show you that it was a poll. I'll correct that going forward. Okay, and so my next question is, for which of these two tasks would you work harder? If I told you that you didn't do so well on the first test, the second test is coming up, and you have to make an A on the next test, you know how hard you would work for that. second scenario, I tell you, look, I said, we're going to have a review session before the second test because the class did horribly on the first test. And I didn't give a review session because I didn't think I needed to, but I see now I need to give a review session for this second test that's coming up. So I'm going to offer a review session and you are going to teach that review session. I'm going to have you come up to the front of the class and you're going to explain all of the important concepts, paying particular attention to the more difficult concepts to make sure everybody is prepared for the test the next day. And here is the poll question that's going to appear in just a second. I want to know if you personally would work harder if you had to make an A on a test, or if you knew that you were going to have to teach the material to the class. And again, you are like your counterparts all over the country. Yeah. Okay. And some of us are saying, make an A. And again, there are no right or wrong answers. And what I find is that typically, oh, wow, we're already up to 75%. So 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we're almost to 80. So we're at 79. Okay. So I will end the poll and show you the results. And you'll see that about 25% would work harder for making an A on the test. But 77 teach the material. And typically I find that people who say they would work harder for making an A, they're studying the right way. But most people say to teach the material. So let me ask you to put in the chat box, why would you work harder if you had to teach the material? And I'll see what, let me let me get this off. Okay, yeah. Why would you work harder if you, because you got to talk in front of people. Sometimes people say embarrassment. There it is, JC. Yeah. Pride, relying on you. I saw that you're responsible for others. This is so interesting. I'll go back. Okay. Looking knowledgeable to the class. So I'm not embarrassed. Yeah. Okay. So there are 3 answers I typically get. And there, Vanessa, you have it. Yeah. People say that you really need to know it if you have to teach it, because you really are needing to help other people understand who didn't understand. So you might have to explain the same thing, 3 different times if people are not getting it. And then sometimes they'll say, well, I don't want to look stupid in front of the class. And you guys said that you don't want to be embarrassed. And then the other reason is that they say, well, now I'm responsible for everybody's grade in the class. And so one young lady said, and if I do a bad job teaching and everybody fails, then I'm not going to have any friends after that. But the interesting thing is that at PLNU, there were way more of you who said that you were responsible for other people. And so I love that. You've got that, love that you're concerned about others, and that's great. Okay, so now the next, and this is a poll question, I think. You know what? I'm sorry, Gail. Oh, no, this is good. No, this is right. Okay, so since we now know what you would work harder for, I want to know, up to this point in time, have you been working to make A's on tests, or have you been preparing to teach the material? So in other words, if on test day you went to take the test and the professor said, well, we're not going to have a test today, you're going to come up and review all the information, would you have been prepared to do that? And I will see. So, yeah. So, I'm sorry. This is the wrong question. I'm sorry. That's right. Okay. I changed the order. I am so sorry. So, okay. So let me take this off. And when I sent the revised one, I sent it to Joe, Gail. I'm so sorry. And I indicated that I had changed the order of the slides, but the questions hadn't changed. But I'm sorry you didn't get that part. So the mindset questions are coming up later, and we won't do this one. But so put in the chat box for me, please. Up to this point in time, have you been preparing more to make an A? Have you been studying to make an A on the test, or have you been preparing to teach the material? Okay, yeah, and most of us are in one. Absolutely, I was the same way. And so, because, nobody ever said you need to be able to teach this stuff, but you heard Dana saying that she was preparing as if she had to teach it to others. And so the bottom line is that we need to be in teach the material mode. And this is an example of a young man who heard about this strategy in a session on September 17th, and he told me he loved this strategy. He was going to try it. He had a betta fish in his room, and he was going to start teaching to his betta fish. And about 5 weeks later, he sent me the change in scores. His bio exam went from 66 to 98, Chem from 62 to 83. He ended up with a B in both courses by teaching his betta fish. And this is the email that he sent me about what he did differently. And so he started, do you have SI? Give me a yes or no in the chat box. Do you have supplemental instruction at PLNU? Okay, and okay. Oh, no, that's okay. No frowny faces. No, we're good. It's fine. Because I think you do have tutoring there, do you? Yeah. Okay, I'll tell you what SI is. It is peer-led. It's like group study, peer-led group study where they talk about effective learning strategies. And so, okay, so Kai says, that's what you're talking about. Yeah, we do that. And so this particular student was going to some of those sessions before he heard the talk, but he wasn't doing anything. He wasn't really preparing for the sessions. He would just go and see what they were going to talk about. But then after he heard this, he started preparing for these sessions. He started doing as many of the problems as he could beforehand. So he knew what he understood and what he needed to concentrate on in those sessions. And then after those sessions, he went back to his room and he taught the materials to his betta fish. And anything he couldn't explain, he studied that more. And then he continued that cycle until he could explain everything in his notes. And you see what a powerful impact that had. I had a veterinary student once who was flunking animal physiology. And she ended up making an A in the course. And she came by to thank me. And so I said, well, what did you do? And she said, Dr. McGuire, I have the smartest dog in animal physiology on the planet. She said, every day I would go home and teach him what we had learned. So this is a very powerful strategy. And so to ace everything at PLNU, you got to stay in learn mode, not study mode, and prepare as if you have to teach the material. Now, I am confident that no matter what you have done up to this point, that you can still ace courses, because I know it's possible to make very fast and dramatic increases in your performance, because it's not about how smart you are. It's all about using your brain. And this next little activity is going to demonstrate that. So on the next slide, you're going to see a bunch of numbers all jumbled up. And I'm going to give you 15 seconds to first find the number 1, then find the number 2, then find 3. And when I take them off the screen, I want you to put in the chat box the last number you saw when you were finding them in sequential order. So let's start finding the numbers now. And stop. Okay, so put in the chat box, what was the last number you saw when you were finding them in sequential order? Okay, I'm saying 8, 2. Okay, yeah, I'm saying mostly single digits, some low double digits. Yep, that's what people do. Now, I did see an 80, but sometimes people misinterpret the question. So I wasn't asking you to put the biggest number you saw, because that is 80, but you got to find them in sequential order. And I don't think we could have found 80 in 15 seconds in sequential order. But I typically get low single digits. Single digits or low double digits. But now I want you to see the same diagram with a vertical line and a horizontal line and the position of the number 1. And now what you're going to see is that the numbers are arranged according to something. And when you see what they're arranged according to, then put that in the chat box for me, please. When you go from the 1 to the 2 to the 3 to the 4 to the 5 to the 6. Okay, yes, it goes in a circle or clockwise, absolutely. And sometimes students say quadrant. Okay, so now that we know how they're organized, I am going to give you another 15 seconds to find as many numbers as you can, and then put in the chat box the last number you saw this time as you were finding them in sequential order. So let's start finding the numbers now. And stop. Okay, so put in the chat box the number that you, the last number you saw this time. Okay, 22, 23, 20. Yeah, and so it seems like most of us got at least twice what we did the first time. And there's a different example in the book, and the one in the book, most people get even 3 times better. But now there were major differences between the first and second attempt. Why could we do so much better the second time around than we did the first time around? What was the difference? What did we have the second time, or what? Okay, yes, we knew the pattern and we had more information. We knew where to look. We had a strategy. Absolutely. So we knew how the information was organized, as you said. We could look at a smaller area because now we knew what section to look at. And we also were seeing it for the second time. And so what that says is it's so important to study as we go along, because then you can look at smaller segments of it, as opposed to if you wait till the night before, you got all the stuff to look at and it's hard to keep it all straight. So basically, you can turn yourself into an expert efficient learner by doing those think aloud exercises, constantly asking why, how, what if questions, always testing your understanding by pretending you're teaching, and then moving higher on this thing that I mentioned earlier, which was Bloom's taxonomy. And this is what Bloom's taxonomy looks like. And Gail, our next poll question is going to be the one about the Blooms, if it makes sense for you to put it in. I certainly apologize. But Bloom's taxonomy, the lowest level is remembering. So if you've memorized something verbatim, you're at level 1. If you're at understanding, then you know it well enough that you could explain any concept to your 80-year-old grandmother, your 8-year-old nephew in words they understand. You could give them examples, analogies from their life. If you're at applying, now you can work problems, you can answer questions that you've never seen before. If you're analyzing, you can take any concept, break it into simpler concepts, and explain how those fit together. If you're at evaluating, you could look at any 2 theories, any 2 concepts, and determine whether one is more likely to be correct than another. And if you're at creating, you can come up with your own ideas, your own thoughts, your own ways of doing things. And so I want you to think back to when you were in high school. That was lickety split, Gail. Thank you. When you were in high school, and tell me what was the highest level of Bloom's that you typically had to operate to make A's and B's in your high school class. And I see the answers coming in, and it looks like you are, again, like your colleagues all around the country. We're at just about 60%. So we're on the way to 70, and I will give us the 5-second warning. Okay, we're just about at 70. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and I will stop the share, and I'm sorry, I'll end the poll and share the results. And yes, most of us were at 1s, 2s, and 3s, and a few people are higher, but most of us here. And let me X this out. But now I want you to think about your experience at PLNU. And I want you to indicate, and this is a poll question, I want you to tell me what level of Bloom's do you think you'll have to operate to make the A's that you're totally capable of making at PLNU. And we will see, okay, so far you, again, right with your colleagues. And one of the reasons I love doing this is because this happened to me. When I understood that what I was doing was wrong, I was in memorization mode and I needed to be higher, then that's when I saw a lot of things change for me. So we're at about 65%. I'll give you 2 more seconds and then we will end it. I should have said 5 more seconds. I think 5 seconds have passed now. So I will end the poll, share the results. And yes, you'll see that you went higher. Now, I see a couple of people said remembering and a few people said understanding and applying. And sometimes I speak at institutions and more people say, you know, the lower levels. And then when that happens, I say, okay, I see you're saying, you know, lower levels, but do you have any term papers to write or any projects that you have to do or any research papers? And if you have any of those, what level is that? If you've got research projects, if you've got term papers, if you've got those kinds of things, just put the number in the chat box. If one is remembering to, yeah. Let me get rid of the whole thing. Okay, and I'm actually going to say it depends on the project, but typically it's creating, because no matter what the project or the research paper is, the ones that get the highest scores are the ones that demonstrate the greatest level of creativity. And so it really is, for most of us, 6. And so that's the third piece of the puzzle. So if you weren't doing as well as you could, then it's not because you're not smart. It's you were in study mode and not learn mode. You were studying to make A's on tests instead of preparing to teach the material. And now we see that you are at a lower level of Bloom's. Well, how do you move yourself higher? We suggest this study cycle, which we call, that has focused study sessions. Oh, let me go back. Going the wrong way. Let me go back to previous and then go back. I don't know why this, yeah, there it is. Okay. And so this study cycle is just a 5-step process where the first step is to preview the material that's going to be covered in class before you go to class, so you can give your brain that overview. And then you have to go to class. I'm sorry, preview, that was review. Preview is here. Yeah, preview. And then you have to go to class. And I'm sure that none of you miss any classes, but give me a yes or no in the chat box. Have you ever sat in class and the information is going, let's say, from the, I used to say the board, but now it's the slides, to your paper if you're taking notes, and not passing through your brain at all? You're just kind of, okay, yes, that happens to everybody. But if you've done the previewing, then you are prepared, you've prepared your brain for paying attention to what's happening in lecture. You can respond to questions, you can stay with the instructor. And then as soon after class as possible, review what just happened in class. Because in class, the information is going into short-term memory. And if you don't do something with it to start it moving into long-term memory, then you're not going to be able to use it later on. And if you're efficient, it only takes about 10 minutes to do the preview and the review. And so we got to do more than that. And so we talk about how to study, and we call them focused study sessions. And you heard, well, no, you will see a student who used the focus study sessions to her great advantage. But those things just are how you structure. Let's say if you're going to study for about an hour, take a minute or two to set a goal for what you want to accomplish, and then study with focus and action, and then take a break, and then come back and recap, kind of summarize what you've just studied, and then decide, do you have enough energy and time to do another one, or do you need to come back later? And then once a week, just check to see, how is this going? Can I teach the material? Have I mastered it? Are there other things that I need to do? And so students love this thing. And this young lady, who is now finishing up her PhD, she got her undergrad degree in 2018, and she is graduating in 2022, December. So she went through lickety split, but she said it was the focused study sessions that helped her the most. She said that she got A+ on 3 out of 4 of her finals studying that way, and she uses it every day before finals week. But she said it's going to be helpful every day before finals week, but it really helps during finals week because it's kind of a time management tool also. Okay, and actually I'm seeing something here. I'm having so much fun with you. I see that it is now about 5:11 and we're supposed to end at 5:15, but I may go over about 5 minutes. I promise it won't be any more than 5 minutes, but I never do that without getting permission from my participants to do that. So put in the chat box, is it okay if we go over about 5 minutes? Oh, please, somebody said please. Thank you so much. Oh, and I see all the yeses. Oh, y'all make me feel so good. Okay, so, but I promise it's not gonna be more than 5 minutes. And so these things really, really work. And so I want to just take a minute to talk about mindset, and that's the work of Carol Dweck, who talks about the attitude of most people about intelligence. They think either you're born with a certain amount of it that's not going to change very much, and she calls that a fixed mindset. The other way of thinking is that you can grow your intelligence with your actions. You're not born with a set amount of intelligence. You can make yourself smarter. And we know that the growth mindset is much closer to the truth because of things like neurogenesis, brain plasticity. You can make yourself smarter. And it's really important to understand what mindset you have, because your reactions to a lot of things are based on mindset. People with a fixed mindset tend to avoid challenges. They give up very easily when they get to something hard because they see effort as pointless. They think either they're smart enough to do it without working, or they're not smart enough to do it at all. So why spend energy when it's going to be pointless? They ignore useful criticism, and they feel threatened when others succeed. But if you have a growth mindset, you embrace challenges, you persist even when you're facing setbacks, because you know that effort is the path to mastery. You learn from constructive criticism, and you find inspiration when others are successful. And this little diagram shows that if you have a fixed mindset, you plateau very early and you don't achieve your full potential. Whereas if you have a growth mindset, each one of these things allows you to grow a little bit more, so that when you are going along, you have a greater sense of free will, you reach higher and higher levels of achievement. And so I wanted to ask you, what mindset about intelligence, fixed or growth, do you think most students have? And so I think, yeah, this is a poll. So we're going to give a minute. Okay, yeah, and you can actually put in the chat box too. Okay, so, oh, that's right, because this is the one that we did earlier, so it's not going to be possible to go back to it. Sorry, Gail. Yeah, put in the chat box. Okay, now this is great. So I'm seeing more growth. I'm seeing a lot of fixed, but I'm seeing more growth than I see usually. My experience is that most students have a fixed mindset because we're kind of socialized into having a fixed mindset where, you know, people say, you know, you're really, really smart or you're not so smart. And we see in third grade, you know, we knew who the smart students were, who the slow students were. And when we got to 12th grade, the pecking order really hadn't changed that much. The smart students were still the smart students, and the slow students were the slow students. But I'm glad to see that more of you have a growth mindset. And I think that I know why, because you know Philippians 4:13, that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And so you are not fixed with what you can do. And so this is great. But I do think that most students do have a fixed mindset. Okay, and so this is a part of an interview from a Princeton student who was she was majoring in neuroscience, and she was from a public high school, and she struggled a lot her first year making B's and C's. And she talked with some of her friends, and they had decided that because they were from public high schools, not private, that they were relegated to making B's and C's at Princeton. It was only the students who went to the elite private schools that were going to make the A's. But she said, the growth mindset chapter in the book was so important, because before that, she thought if you're smart, you're smart. If you came from a private high school, you're set. If you come from a public high school, you can't even grow. But now she knows that you have challenges to overcome, but you can use strategies to overcome those. And when she was in her first neuroscience class, she was making a C, but she really liked the professor. And so she wanted to do research with that professor. So she went to the professor's office to see, could she do research in her lab? And the professor scoffed at her. She laughed at her. She said, you're making a C in my class. Why are you even majoring in neuroscience? And so she said she went home and she cried the rest of the night, and she thought about if she could change to something else, but she couldn't think of anything else she wanted to change to. And so she said she went back and she looked at the strategies and decided to try those. And she ended up getting an A+ on her senior thesis and making all A's her senior year while taking all neuroscience courses. And she said if it wasn't for the growth mindset, she wouldn't be at Princeton, because now she knows, though, that that just because you're from a public high school doesn't mean you can't thrive at a prestigious institution. And so I always like students to know that it doesn't matter what you've done up to this point, it starts now. And if you use the strategies, that's going to make all the difference. And so some of the effective metacognitive strategies that we've talked about are these. We've gone over most of those, but I do want to encourage you to strive for 100% mastery, not 90%, because that makes a big difference. And as a writing exercise, I do want, before you go to sleep tonight, I want you to indicate which one of these strategies you are most likely to implement. Thanks. This is our final poll. Yes. And so of all the things we talked about, you don't have to do everything, but it's good to pick at least one and do that. And so, okay, practice teaching the material. Well, all of them are great strategies, but using the study cycle, textbook, more problems, And I'm always looking to see if anybody puts none of the above, and nobody put none of the above. And so I feel good about that. Oh, we're at 75%. So I'm going, oh, a mixture of all. I love it because the more you can do, the better. And I will end the poll and share the results. And so you've got some great things there that you're going to try. And I want you to know that if you don't start it within the next 48 hours, you probably never will. So it's important to start it now. And so to end, I want to go back to that bumblebee story that I was telling you at the beginning, and I'll tell you why bumblebees can fly. You heard that this dinner party was in the 1930s, and this is when aerodynamic science was in its infancy. And so the calculations this guy was making, he was making assumptions as if bumblebee wings were like airplane wings, because he was using the calculations that he had used on airplane wings. Well, he was making the wrong assumption, because airplane wings are very different from bumblebee wings. Airplane wings are smooth and flat, and they don't move. But bumblebee wings have lots of bumps and zigs and zags, and they are constantly flapping. And it's this constant flapping that creates these airfoils that gives the bumblebee enough lift to stay aloft. So the bottom line is, if anybody tells you that you are not going to be successful doing something that you put your mind to, tell them, check your assumptions. I am a PLNU sea lion, and I can achieve anything that I put my mind to, and then drop the mic, walk away, and leave them in your green and gold dust. So thank you very much. That is all I have. And so I will stop the share now and turn it. Oh, thank you. I'm seeing some thank yous in the chat box. Well, thank you. You guys have been great. I've so enjoyed talking with you. Wow. Oh, woo. Okay. I love it. Love it. And let me just, say thank you to you, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Clemens.